Hello, everyone, and welcome to Unconvention 2021. For those of you who are just joining us, in the previous hour, we completed a fascinating masterclass with George on building bigger by scaling operations. We are now starting our second masterclass of the day, which is an interesting topic on thriving, not striving, sales strategies for success by Rimi Datta from Centric Brand Advisors. Centric Brand Advisors is also a technical partner for Unconvention 2021. With this, I pass over the floor to you, Rini.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me and giving me an opportunity to talk to you. It's a pleasure and an honor. A pleasure because I love working with Will Grow and social entrepreneurs, and an honor because many of you are doing really awesome stuff in your sectors. So it's a great opportunity for me to actually talk to you, and I really look forward to the question answers that we could have at the end of the session. A little bit about myself before we move on. So I'm a sales and marketing professional, and I've worked in companies as diverse as Unilever and Titan and stuff. And when I set up my company, we provide sales and marketing solutions. And we are lucky that about 70% of our portfolio are social sector companies. We work with companies like Willgrow, CCamp, A-Tree, and many other incubators, plus, of course, the startups, which are our lifeblood. Today, really, I'm going to actually share a short presentation where I will talk to you about sales strategies for success. The reason why I'm sharing this is, one of the most important things about building a larger organization is having the right sales support. And this is something which over the years I have seen social entrepreneurs sometimes need a little bit of help. And that's primarily because social entrepreneurs are visionaries. They are people who make fabulous products and services. They may be great technologists. They may be activists. They may be genuine people who want to solve a problem. But many a times, they don't have practical sales and marketing knowledge. So as a result, in spite of a lot of knowledge about the sector, a lot of hard work and dedication, if you don't have the right tools or the right places to go to, then sometimes it's difficult to succeed. So today it's a short session. I just like to talk about the main problems that social entrepreneurs face. And my session will be about mostly early stage social entrepreneurs, because I think that's the profile of people who have come to this session. And also the problems and therefore some of the solutions. I have also put together a resources file. It's available in our virtual booth, which will help you learn more about these approaches. So I would like to share my screen now. And, I'd really look forward to getting some questions from you guys. I hope I'm able to show my screen.
Yes.
I'll just do a full screen. So like I said, today our topic is just something very close to my heart. I meet a lot of social entrepreneurs. In fact, many of my friends are social entrepreneurs now. And several times I feel they're great people and they seem to be striving and working very hard. So I think if we just have some sales strategies, then we can quickly make the shift from striving to thriving, and especially much needed after the rather terrible 2020 year which has gone by. So 2020 was a bad year for many of us. It was bad because it began with the COVID situation, the lockdown, the subsequent shrinkage of the economy, and it had a terrible effect on all of us, both as individuals as well as business people. Individuals, we lost loved ones, we were living in fear. It was a terrible thing which we never thought we'd experience. And business-wise, money was tight. Many of us lost our jobs, and overall, it was not a positive situation. But 2021, from all accounts, seems to be the year for transition. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is there are lots of studies which have come out recently, including the McKinsey Quarterly, a very good study which talk of trends of 2021. And it basically says that Individuals, business, and society can now start to look forward this year rather than just surviving, in which is pretty much what a lot of us did in 2020. So, why is this so important for us in the social sector? So, I've just put together some screen grabs of why it's so important for us and why are social entrepreneurs so important in the year 2021. Because everywhere people are talking about how the economy is going to bounce back and how things are going to get better and stuff like that. But social entrepreneurs are the people who are going to solve market and government failures by ensuring that the underserved, the excluded population also get the benefits of the economic recovery. In other words, decades of work which have happened in this sector can just go down the drain unless social entrepreneurs are able to step in and make sure that everybody grows. It's not just the rich, it's not the well connected, it's not just the developed nations. All of us need to recover, and for that social entrepreneurs have to do perhaps a disproportionate amount of work. We need social entrepreneurs to do what they are doing, and most importantly to do it bigger. And that's why the topic for today: how do we build bigger? How do we use sales to build bigger organizations so that more people get benefits of economic recovery, especially in the post COVID situation? So it doesn't matter whether you work in health tech, whether you work in education, agribusiness, solid waste management, water, it doesn't really matter. Social entrepreneurs are doing very good work in sectors which are underserved, and we need you guys to grow bigger. And sales is one of the ways by which companies which are launched or in ready to launch phase can actually start growing and moving towards profitability. So throughout the presentation, I've included lots of pictures of my clients. This is Bempo Health, Will Grow Incubity, very nice team. And really working with them and many other people, I've realized, like I mentioned before, I believe social entrepreneurs are visionaries. You have great products and services, but sometimes you may not have practical sales and marketing experience. So what happens? Now, unfortunately, most people have wonderful ideas. So when you have an idea, many of you are able to even test the idea. You're able to prototype it and test the market. There's a lot of support which comes to us from incubation units like Will Grow, the social sector. Everybody's connected. But what actually happens is once you make the product, you need to actually commercialize, and that's really where different set of skills come in. When you are ready to launch your brand and when you're ready to move and make a business model and grow and ultimately reach let's say profitability in a good way, because you need to grow to help more people, you need a different set of skills. So what really happens? If you see the slide, it's common. I mean, I work with other startups as well who are not in the social sector, and I find the same problem. Most of the time, once you have an idea, you've done the R&D, you've done the technology transfer, it's really when you start to commercialize that you learn that you need tools to support commercialization. And when I mean tools to support commercialization, it's because from an idea to a businessman, from an inventor to an entrepreneur, from an activist to a social entrepreneur, there is a change in mindset and there is a change in the skills needed. So for the past year or so, I've been really lucky, and I've done series of workshops for incubators like Wilgrow or CCAM, and worked with lots of startups. So in today's session, what I've really done is I've tried to identify the critical problems that startups face when they start to sell their products and services, and also try to talk of some of the solutions which are possible. Now, do remember, this is a short session. I'd like to speak only for about 30 odd minutes so that I could answer questions. So this will be an overview, but more information is available in my resources deck. And you can also Google and find more. And of course, you can connect with me. So let's just dive right in. So really, what are the challenges faced by social startups? The first big challenge is, how do you communicate impactfully? And by this, I mean, many times we're dealing with complex issues, difficult things people don't want to talk about. So when you want to talk about it, how do you articulate in a way that engages the other person? The last thing we want is a potential customer to get turned off by what we're saying. We want to begin a dialogue. So the first step in sales is really figuring out how do we communicate in an impactful way. And I'll be very frank, for an early stage startup, there is really not much difference between sales and marketing. It's the same. It's the same as both sides of the same coin. So some of the things which I'll talk of are what are traditionally marketing, but like I said, you'll need to use both when you want to move from an idea to commercialization stage. So number one, how do I communicate impactfully? I'm saying this because a lot of my clients, especially the ones from CCAM, they're brilliant technologists, but they're not really good communicators. So they have great products and services, but they're not able to engage the person on the other side of the table. So this is the first thing which you can do. And you don't need any great skills for it. You can actually make your own pitch deck in a more impactful way, which I will talk about. The second one is people are positive, but they're not buying. And I've seen a lot of this. Like when you've got the idea stage and everybody's all excited and helpful, and it usually happens if you're bright, young, and you have like a lot of passion, people are ready to engage with you. But once your product or service is ready, you find that it's difficult to get people to sign up. And many a times they ask you like, who are your customers? And you're like, hey, I've just launched, I don't have customers. And then it seems to be even more difficult. How do you get more people to buy? Then something which I've noticed is that when you start selling to people, they give you feedback and your offering is changing with the feedback. So when do you stop changing your offering, or like um, what do you do in this situation? And then once you decide enough is enough, I have to launch now, you launch. But many times you don't have any proven sales tools, you don't have a sales approach, you just work really, really hard. And I've seen that, I've done it myself. You just put in more and more hours of effort and you get the initial leads, but nothing really seems to be happening. And the reason this happens a lot is because social entrepreneurs, the founders themselves, they do everything. They do the sales, they do the product development, merchandise mix, fundraising, and everything. So sometimes giving dedicated time or having proven tools for sales is really not their priority. And that's why sometimes it leads to point number 5, which is poor lead generation. And then we move in to the next part, which is when you have poor leads, sometimes you feel that the sales cycle is too long, it's unpredictable. And then there's cost cutting and funds dry up and there's limited income. So in other words, these are some of the most common problems which I've seen with social entrepreneurs, and these are all real world problems. So what I've tried to do now is, since I can't address all of them, I've tried to address 3 or 4 big problems. The first one is, how do you communicate your idea impactfully? Now, during the unconvention itself, reached out to quite a few startups and, just introduce myself to try and understand what they're doing, because I think you guys are doing exciting work. So what I'd like to share with most of you is, we don't live in a perfect world. In a perfect world, people would be swayed by facts and objectivity. But unfortunately, in real life, people are bored, impatient, emotional. So it's very difficult for people to grasp complex issues. And when a topic is complex, stories are like leverage. So you need to have a story. You need to have a way to engage the other person on the other side. It doesn't have to be a 16 segment, drama. It could be a 30-second story, but there has to be a story when you want to engage someone on the other side. So this is my client, one of my first clients in the social sector, Ravindra Karnat. He works with solid waste management, and that's the case study we talk about. Is one of the things which he told me was, to achieve commercial success, he had to stop thinking like an activist and start thinking like a business. And that was really what really helped him move on from being a smaller player to becoming a serious contender in community waste management solutions. So in other words, what I'm suggesting is, when you want to reach out to a customer, we have to stop thinking about the inside out approach. It's got to be outside in, which is, stop thinking about what we are trying to sell, but rather think, what is their problem and are we solving their problem? What is our tone of voice? Is it shrill? Is it angry? Or is it, affiliative? Can we work together? So it's 2 things. So first of all, what are the functional and emotional benefits which you are offering? Rational benefits which exist within the category, that's something which many of us are very comfortable with. But what about stuff like emotional aspects, which also define decision making? And please remember, when you move from idea to actual sales, people start talking about things like trust, credibility, customer service, because they start evaluating the startup vis-a-vis the existing players or maybe MNCs. And MNCs have got this kind of stuff, going on. So what are our functional and emotional benefits? How are we solving the functional and softer issues of the client? And second, and this is something which you need to remember, you don't have to be the first to grow, but you have to be different and better than the competition, which is, how are you different from the competition? And last but not the least, sure, you're different, but is your solution worth spending the additional money and changing my habit? These are 2 things which people think of. when we meet customers, they don't talk like this to us, but this is really how they process the information. And sometimes when people say that we're not really interested, we need to dig deeper and say, were we able to actually solve the customer's problem, or we were just focusing on our own solution? And really, it's that mind shift that you need to make. The case study today is a very, again, like I said, it's on solid waste management. Why did I choose it? Because we see this problem almost every day, whether you live in Bangalore, Delhi, or Bombay, we see garbage. We feel, many of us look away because we feel helpless or we feel angry. We want the government or somebody else to fix the problem. And really, that's because many of us don't want to be part of the problem, but we don't know how to find the solution. So my client really was an eco-friendly startup, and I'm talking about 2015. Um, he said that sure there were a lot of solutions at that time which were about individual composting, but my client felt that the biggest problem was being created by gated communities, apartment complexes, because the rich generate more waste than the poor. And the rich were not ready to make this change. And why was that it? Because the news which we're reading, the grim realities of the solid waste management problem, the terrible situation of landfills, the pollution, that was really not enough to make people change their habits. And why was that? Because communities were run by professionals, they had no time, and the existing solutions were sure they worked, but they were time consuming, they required special labor, dedicated space, they were an eyesore. I mean, there were lots of problems. So my client decided to communicate his value proposition totally differently. He said that the first step, he said, I want to be more relevant to them. So I'm going to offer affordable solutions without capital investment, and I'm going to offer free trial. So I am relevant because I have a solution, but you can try and then make up your mind. And then how am I different from the other players in the market? I'm going to offer trained staff, customer support, use of composting, and if you want an ergonomic design. So why was that really so helpful? Because he stopped talking about the problem in generic terms. He started addressing the unsaid problems of the customer. Everybody knows what the problem is, but when you want someone to change their habits and to adopt a new solution or a new technology, then you have to meet both their vocal as well as their unmet needs. And in this case, most of the communities wanted a no smell solution, and my client's technology offered it. They wanted something which looked nice. He came up with ergonomic designs, which were pretty. They wanted trained staff, and that's what he did. So over a period of time, he was able to grow. And if you notice, it's slightly dated, but in a relatively short period of time, he was able to onboard more customers and is now quite a serious player in the community composting business. So this brings us to the next step. So what we spoke of till now was how can you communicate impactfully to your prospective customers? The second one is, which I hear quite often, is how do you acquire the first few customers? And the reason happens is that social entrepreneurs, you get a lot of help from the ecosystem if you're lucky and someone like Will Grow helps you out. But getting the first few customers is really difficult. And this is a problem which is faced across board because buyers, they don't just want to see the idea of the product. They want scalability, customer support, after sales service, which is often missing in a bootstrapped or an early stage startup. So how do you do it? So this is my client, which is in molecular diagnostics, and this is their code, which the best way to do it is that don't just depend on a few, broad base your efforts. And really, when they started off prior to launch, they were just speaking to a few hospitals. And then after a period of time, they broad based their approach and they approached 45 hospitals over a period of 3 months. And they were able to identify six who were willing to talk to them. This is at a preclinical trial. So what am I trying to say is that if we speak to a few people, it's going to be difficult for us because social entrepreneurs come up with new ideas, new solutions, and sometimes they're more expensive than the conventional ones. And to do that, to move into commercialization, we need to talk to early adopters. Now, most of you are familiar with the early adopter concept, but basically it means that if we go to 100 people, like at the most three are likely to be early adopters. So I don't want to dishearten you, but all I'm trying to say is if we just speak to a few of potential customers, then we will notice that our conversion ratio is low. But if you broad base it and if you're ready to let go of your initial, ready to test your initial hypothesis and let go of some notions as to who is your prospective customer, you may end up seeing a different profile arise, and that's really your early adopters. And why should early adopters be loved and cared for? Because they are more tolerant of product limitations. And if they're happy with your product, they become your advocates. So how do you go about it? I have covered it in my resources document, but basically, if you're a health tech company, then you don't just talk to 5 or 6 hospitals. We have 200 hospitals in Bangalore City alone covered by insurance. And if you are selling an innovation, chances are a hospital with insurance cover would look at you. And they are different classifications. So I would suggest that first you meet at least 50 people who are decision makers across the segment. What happens is when you do this, we start identifying the types of people who may be ready to engage with us, what are their likes and dislikes, and what are most importantly the barriers and triggers to trial. And in other words, when you increase the base of your funnel, you can get access to more qualified leads. Like I said, in sales, there's a lot of hard work, a lot of grunt work. But if we can put in the effort and maybe even at a pre-launch stage, when you're ready to launch, you have a few people whom you've been chatting with for a while, and they ultimately end up being your early adopters. So what do you need to do when you meet an early adopter? Like I said, first be very clear. You need to understand what the customer's problem is, and that's how you're articulating it. And that's the first part of our conversation, which we covered. How do you communicate your idea? But once you communicate your idea, once you start engaging with them, what's the value proposition that we see? I attended a very nice session hosted by Will Grow on innovations in the healthcare segment. And one of the gentlemen there said, if it doesn't make money for the doctor, it doesn't make money for the hospital, you're not likely to get much face time. And I thought that's the crux of the matter. Is your value proposition offering the other person value for money? And second, once you are able to do that and customers have tried your brand, because when you're a new brand, you need trials. Are they ready to buy the brand after the first trial? So what I'm trying to say is, if you've figured out how to communicate customers, if you've gone to a large enough potential customer base, and when you're ready to talk to them on the table, make sure that your arguments have covered these two things. Are you doing or giving them something which is value for money for them, which is profitable for them? Are you giving them something which they're ready to pay money for, and so that they can make more money out of it? Because ultimately it's a business transaction. And this doesn't mean you have to discount it. It just means that you have to give them value for money. And discounting is not necessarily giving someone great value. And finally, if you manage to convince your potential customers to try your brand, post trial, do they feel that the problem solved was big enough for them to go with you, to switch from their existing provider? So this is something which I touched upon before. So what happened was really the client went, they're very, very nice and bright team of truly inspirational people. And they were supported by a lot of people. So they realized the company needs to have a proper understanding, and they went to a large number of hospitals, pitched to them. And 6 were willing to engage in a pre-launch stage. And like I said, most of the time it's the founders of social sectors, companies who do the sales pitch. So there's a lot of passion which you bring to the table, and that really sways the early adopter, because the early adopters don't necessarily just buy the product or service. They also buy into the person on the other side. So in the initial stages, yeah, you'll have to make your pitches yourself, because that's going to make sure that the early adopter sees the person, the man or the woman behind the brand or idea. And that's really what's going to tell them that I want to take a bet on this person. I think it's very similar to how an investor thinks, which many of you would be familiar with. So just remember, a potential customer is also an investor for us, because they're going to give us money. So yeah. And next, so once you figured out how to communicate to them, you know your value proposition. How do you actually acquire customers? So I just want to clarify, I do know that social entrepreneurs multitask and you're perpetually facing fund shortage. So sales is really the last item on your list of priorities. And that's because you're fundraising, you're managing your team, you're doing product development, crisis management. I mean, there are a lot of stuff that you're doing. So sales sometimes just gets forgotten. And there are moments when people do like a flurry of sales, and then there are moments when you're really busy with something else. So as you figured out by now, I love structure. So I feel that in the absence of a structured approach, um, two things happen. One is there is fluctuation in the amount of effort you put into something. And second, you can't even review because you know that you've really not put in as much effort as you'd like. So there are various means by which you can do sales. You can Google and find out. There are different sales structures. But today what I've done is I've shared one example which we used. This is a quote from my client. This is not my client. This is a prospective customer who is actually a customer. Which is my client was selling IT solutions to Kirana stores. in tier 2 and tier 3 locations. Kirana stores, I mean the small stores which sell grocery, household products, really small and tiny. And there's a shopkeeper and his son or daughter who sits there. They run it's like a family run store. And they're very, very careful about their money. And, they've been doing things in a particular way. So selling to them is really difficult. So my client was very clear that the reason why he felt he was able to make a difference in this business was he said he wanted to make sure that everybody was satisfied with him. And in his own words, he says, "Mujhe kuch bechna nahi hai. I don't want to sell something. I want to help them achieve their goal. Because if they achieve their goal, we achieve the goal." And I loved the way he said it, that bechna nahi, problem solving is my job. And I really liked the way he said it. He summed it up because he really brought it alive. If you solve the customer's problem, then and only then will he trust you. And therefore, what I'd like to say is sales does not happen overnight. We take a while because any human being has a journey. I mean, when we see a new brand, either we dislike it or we like it. If we dislike it, it's an emotional response. It's very difficult to change the customer's mind. But if we like a brand, we don't buy it immediately. I mean, that's very rare, especially if it's a high ticket item or it involves a change in habit. Because as human beings, what we do is we become aware of a brand, its brand proposition, and then we start considering, is it relevant for me? Will it solve a problem for me? Will it solve a problem better than I'm currently doing? And then, is it worth paying extra for? Or is it worth changing my habits? And it's only then that the brand enters your consideration set. So these are steps which happen in the mind very fast. It's very difficult for us to look at a customer and say he's in the consideration phase or he's in the evaluation phase. But in reality, that's really how people think. So we need a sales process which mimics the way the customer thinks. And the one which I'm sharing today is really a simple funnel-based approach to onboard a customer. If you see this, it's how do you use a checklist to onboard a customer is you use a 4-step checklist where first you reach out to the customer. And this works really well for a B2B company where you actually go make sure that is your customer aware of what you're selling, about your brand and offering. How can you do it? Through search, through content, events, a webinar like ours, advertising, whatever. There are lots of ways. Then as a founder, you can decide, was a discovery session conducted? Like, did you find someone who's interested in, was a discovery session where you actually shared what you have to offer and check whether they are interested in it? Was it done? And the consideration evaluation stage takes a while. So maybe take a few days, weeks, even a few months, depending on your category. And if the person said yes, did you go to them with a decision point, a price proposal? Did you follow up? Because again, I'd like to say nobody takes a decision on the first proposal. I mean, I've never got a project on my first proposal. I mean, the earliest proposal went through was like the third iteration to a proposal. So the first proposal never gets accepted because really it's a learning process. I'm learning what the customer wants, the customer's learning what I can give them. And finally, if everything goes your way and if the customer decides to sign on board, post a negotiation, what was the experience of the customer? And there have been moments when people have shown me great love in the pre-sales process, but the moment I sign on the dotted line, then they're like, okay, bye. I don't even know who you are. So this really spoils the customer journey. And if you can look back, the consideration and evaluation is really just the beginning of the iceberg. And bulk of the time, it's all about keeping your customer, maintaining your customer, because the cost of a repeat sale is negligible, and the cost of getting a referral is also like it's priceless. So it's fabulous. So this is like a first simple funnel-based approach for you to onboard your initial customers. You can tick it off one by one. How many people did you reach to? Were you able to conduct an awareness session? Then after that, if they showed interest, were you able to move them into the consideration evaluation stage, where you actually understood what they like, dislike, etc. And then were you able to move into the decision phase? If you weren't able to move someone to the decision phase, why was it? Was it a rational factor, your functionality of your product or service, or was it an emotional factor? They were happy with the existing service provider. They had issues with whether you'd be able to give service. I mean, it could be anything. And can we work on it and go back to them? Because if you've invested so much to bring a person to decision phase, then in my mind, they are a potential customer. They're a very warm lead. Sooner or later, yeah, they'll buy. So I'm going back to the case study on the IT solution. So what happens is that my client was a very young, very bright team. lots of understanding of technology from small towns, but they never sold anything to Kirana shops. So we realized the company needed a proper sales framework. And the one which I shared with you before, that was fine, but it wouldn't help them run a team across multiple locations. And so we suggested them another model, which is the 7 steps to sales approach. So this is a classic approach, okay? And by classic, I mean you can easily make an Excel sheet and chase, or if you have money, you can do CRM about it. But what you see is you move all the way from prospecting all the way to follow up, which means you prospect, you identify a list of customers, you prepare how are you going to pitch them. If it's a Kirana shop, is it a mom and pop shop? Is it a chain of stores? How do you prepare different approaches if you're a standalone, if you're a chain? How do you approach them? How do you convince them to try your product? Some people use question based where they go and say, you know, aapko kya chahiye? What are your requirements? What are your points of satisfaction, dissatisfaction? And then come back to them with your solution. And the others who we already know the market. So would you like to do free trial? I mean, there are lots of days by which you approach the customer. Then you have presentation where once you broach the topic of conversation, actually you don't make any presentations. You spend all the time speaking to your customer and understanding from them what are their likes and dislikes. And this is really important because you've got to make sure the customer is comfortable enough to actually tell you the real reason why they may hesitate to sign on the dotted line. And then comes the next stage of handling objections. Like I said, very rarely do people buy in the first offer. Over a period of time, people learn how to handle objections and move to closure. But don't get disheartened. The initial proposals are very rarely, if ever, signed because maybe we didn't spend enough time on the presentation approach. We didn't spend enough time trying to understand what the customer's real needs are. And once you've done it, you move into closing, where if the customer has indicated that they are interested. And there are different routes of closing. The details of this approach is given in my resources document. You can read it and see if it works for you. It's also very widely used. It's available online. And finally, if a customer has decided, you sign them up. And then, of course, starts. The second cycle is onboarding the customer. But I'm not spending time on that. I'm assuming your initial few customers are where really you want to focus. So why have I presented this approach? It's because when we try to onboard someone as a customer, we think that we meet them the first time and they should you know, we can actually move ahead. It doesn't work like that. And this approach, you can adapt it for your customer profile, you can adapt it for your business. But it's really step by step, you can make sure that you are spending time with the right people, the people who think your offering is relevant to them, and you're able to actually meet their requirements. Because, like I said, if you can actually solve a problem for customer, then you don't just have a sale, you have like a customer for life. So, this process helps you ensure that you're talking to the right person and you're really able to see whether your product or service can solve their problem. And that's really how relationships are built in sales. It's not by spending time with your customer and endless cups of chai and stuff like that. It's really by being able to understand what your customer wants and whether you're able to provide it or not. And the chances are, even if you can't provide a solution today, uh, you can surely come up with a solution maybe tomorrow, maybe next year. And if it's based on what the customer said, then the customer most probably will get on board. So this is a suggestion which I have when you're launching product. You don't have to go with this one or the funnel approach, but choose some approach because structure makes sure that you are able to work in a systematic manner and review yourself. So even if a few days are spent in crisis management, you can always go back and look at your funnel and say, what was I doing prospecting? Are they stuck at the presentation phase? Am I not able to handle objection? And go right back to lead management, to fund management, because ultimately that's really how we're going to drive sales. My last two slides, really, before I go into the question answer session, is um, we've already talked of the need to have a proper understanding of how to communicate your idea uh, to the person on the other side, which means you have to make sure that you are meeting their rational and emotional needs, and you're very clear about why your brand stands out. Second step, once you've done that, is we also know are we going to the right people, and then we're very structured that our value proposition appeals to them. So it's not just about us, it's about understanding their problem and are we actually solving their problem. And once you've done these two things, you're ready to actually go into a all-out sales model, where I would suggest you use one of the models which are widely available. I have shown you a funnel approach, I have shown you a sales 7 steps to sales approach. Either way, you can use both, one of them, adapt it, etc. But once you have a funnel in place, what you'll find is it becomes easier for you to reach out to people, broad base your funnel, meet more people, and mentally start slotting them into prospective customer, not so prospective customer, etc. And then comes the last phase, really, where most of the time social entrepreneurs, you have to ensure a team is in place to bring the customers involved. And I don't mean the initial phases. Initial phases, all founders have to sell. I saw it in so many of the sessions today where both the founders of various social sector companies were talking. And they said that, we have to do the selling initially. And that doesn't matter whether you're in social sector or in a for profit or anything. It just means that uh, that's really the game where initially the founders sell, and the founders can sell a lot better because they have a lot of passion. They have in-depth understanding of both the problem as well as the solution. But with time, a team is needed. And why does that happen? That happens when you meet more and more customers, and one person cannot meet the customer and provide service the way the customer wants it. Or it can also be that you want to expand beyond one geography, and you find that the customer cannot be managed by just the founders. And therefore, you start to open your circle out and start looking for the right resources. And this is really where it's a game changer. Often I find that, I mean, I can speak from experience. I find it easier for me to do sales and to manage a sales team, literally because I've been doing it for so long. But if I continue with that mindset, I won't be able to grow beyond one city because customers want customer service, they want FaceTime, and they want someone to solve their problem. I can't do that if I'm managing everything myself. So getting the right person on board is often what leads to success. So this is one of my favorite clients. I love working with Blackboard Radio and one of Will Grove's investor companies. They're lovely team. And I love the way he said, I was the sales guy. I did everything myself. And he told me that he spoke to every prospect. And I said, did you ever sleep? He said, no, no, I didn't sleep. I mean, the three of us founders, all we did was we spoke to every prospect because each prospect was like gold and diamond to us, that they wanted to buy our product. And what he told me was that by reaching out to each and every prospect, by treating them like they were very, very valuable, uh, Vatsal and his team actually came back with a proper understanding of both the product and customer needs. And while they understood the customer's needs as well as the value proposition, they grew. But in his opinion, they went to the next level when they found the right guys. And one of the things which Vatsal talks of is that when he hires people, he looks to see whether that guy or that woman can complement his strength. And this is really what I'd like to leave behind with you. Once you've done your initial few sales, or you really feel that you're not the right person to do sales and you need someone to run sales for you, don't forget you have to still lead the team. This cannot be outsourced to anybody else because no one else loves your brand or your offering as much as the founder does. So you can never really stop leading the team, but look for people who think differently. When you're going to sell an innovative solution, someone who is very, very used to doing things in a particular way, they may not be able to sell an innovation and look out of the box. So what I'd suggest is you don't necessarily have to look at people with tons of experience in your sector. You need people with some experience if you feel that's necessary. But it's better to look at the softer skills and to see whether the skills that the next person brings to the table complements your own. So one, do remember, it's still going to be founder-driven sales. And therefore, it's best if you get the basics in place, like you learn how to communicate your idea properly, you know what the value proposition is, and you follow a structured sales approach uh, so that you can move towards your goal in a way which has checks and balances and metrics for evaluation. And on the other side, you can hire for complementary skills. In the initial stages, you may want to look at freelancers. You may want to look at people who you know or people who want to work with you just as volunteers. But in the long run, you will need a dedicated salesperson to help you grow the business. And by dedicated, I mean someone who is as committed to the business as you are. And that takes a while to find. So keep looking for people. And if you meet the right people, definitely sound them out. And when you're trying to hire the right people, use the same approach that you'd use for a customer. Tell them about your idea. tell them why it matters to them and why they will really enjoy working with you, and then try to get them on board. Because as you grow, having a trusted team of people who you have groomed or whom you trust, it really helps make sure that you achieve your milestones. And that's the end of my presentation today. I hope you gain something from this session, and maybe we could take questions now. The first question which I have is on, for a startup working with low income households for livelihoods, yes. Gestation period is long, traction is difficult. Take on designing sales strategy. Okay. So if you're working with low income households, um, my question to you would be, is it a B2B or a B2C? Either way, there would be three things which you would need to do. The first step is look at your value proposition and make sure that it is very well articulated. Sometimes if you're looking at low income households and if the decision maker is the person who's not very well off, they need to be very clear whether whatever you're offering adds value to them. And by value, I would mean, is it making their life easier? Are they making more money? Uh, However you want to look at it, that's the question. So one is make sure that you relook at your value proposition. And if you find that gestation period is very long, it can be because of three things. Now, the first thing is they didn't understand what you were saying, or maybe they felt it was not powerful enough and they were too polite to say that. You one, which is a lack of comprehension of your brand promise. The second one is relevance. Was it relevant to them? Uh, by relevant to them means you need to put yourself in the customer's shoe and dig a little deeper and say that was it relevant enough for them to fork over money or time to actually make a change in their business or the way they were working. And last but not the least, is the gestation period long because of some inefficiencies in the sales process, or is the gestation period long because that's the mindset of your customer? Sometimes when you are an innovator or an early stage startup, gestation period is long because the lack of trust. Whether I'm buying a product or whether I'm taking a free service, whether I'm a low income household or a middle class person, I have issues with believing something that someone else is telling me. So gestation period sometimes also is a reflection of the trust in the relationship. You can build trust in your relationship through communication. You can do it face to face. You can build it through a proper PR exercise where they read about you in the news or they see it on the local news. But what I'm trying to say is, if the gestation period is long because it takes them a certain amount of time for them to trust you, and it's not about the product, the value proposition, or its articulation, then there are ways and means by which you can hurry up the trust factor by associating with names whom they trust, by using proxies who will talk about why you are trustworthy to your target audience, or it could even be through stringent communication. So, to sum up, make sure you're communicating in a very clear manner. Second, make sure that what you're saying is relevant to them. And third, are we building trust so that the sales cycle can get speeded up? Unfortunately, if you find you're doing all these three things and the sales cycle is still very low, then it means that that's something your customer prefers, and you'll have to deal with it until they are more comfortable and the sales cycle shorten. For most brands which are established, sales cycles shorten. So it may be just a period of time for you to establish yourself. So I hope I was able to answer your question. If I haven't, you can always message me again. Uh, yes, the next one is very interesting. Low-cost cooling solution that can work for long period of time. How should I build a sales pipeline? What kind of salesperson should I hire? Yeah, this is fabulous. Okay, because I grew up in Delhi and I grew up in many districts in North India, and it was very hot. And when we got the cooler, we were very excited. Except we had what we used to call load shedding most of the time. It was hot and sweaty. So if you are selling, there are two ways to sell. You can either sell direct to the consumer or you sell through an established distribution system. I would suggest explore both. If you have a small geographical footprint and you want to have direct sales, then you create your own salespeople and you take people who have sold things in direct sales. By direct sales, I mean it's the opposite of indirect sales through a distributor. There are a lot of people who sell cooling solutions. They are dealers and distributors. They exist across the country, across districts, subdivisions, taluks, and they stock products and then they in turn sell to retailers. Retailers are where the end consumer goes and buys his hardware. So in a smaller town, hardware will be the hardware type of shops. He'll have cooler, he'll have gas stove, he'll have fan, he'll have many things in that store. So first step is be very clear. Do you want to sell it yourself, and or do you want to sell it through a distribution channel? Either way, you have to spend money. In one, it looks like you're spending less money because initially you'll be doing all the sales yourself, but sooner or later you'll have to hire somebody. So one is direct cost of your team, and the second one is indirect cost, where you give a margin to your distributor or your dealer, and then you give a margin to the retailer. In both cases, there is cost. So do consider both, because somebody needs to do the last mile for you. Because no one is either, even if they buy directly for you, then that last mile is talking to the consumers and convincing them to buy, or going to a retail store, seeing your point of sales standee or a poster and saying how much ye product chahiye. And that poster or standee actually does the work of your own salesperson. What kind of salesperson should you hire? Like I mentioned, if you feel that someone needs to know the sector, then you take someone with some amount of work experience in the sector. It could be a traditional cooling device, it could be an electric vehicle, it could be either way. You can approach the person with experience saying, have you sold a cooling unit before? Or have you sold something which has done without electricity or using solar power or some other form of technology? And choose the person with the right skills that complement your own. So if you are a great technologist and if you need someone who's just a really good salesperson with great communication skills, look out for the softer aspects as well. So two things: choose, is it direct or is it indirect? At one time, I would never suggest direct, but after seeing the success of brands like ID and others, I've realized direct also is workable, provided your footprint is kind of compact. And what kind of salespeople? Look at what skills you bring to the table, what skills the other person is supposed to bring to the table, and try to marry the two. Don't hire too many salespeople initially, because it's a tried and tested process where you have to transfer a lot of your time and energy to the person, and he takes it forward. And my only suggestion will be, just remember, no salesperson will bring as much of passion and as much of technical knowledge as a founder. So we have to give them some time to catch up with us. And sometimes the relationship may work out, sometimes it may not. But often the early salespeople in companies, they actually help build your company, and people whom you trust. And so that's my answer to you. You think gender inclusion can be a good sales strategy? Yes. How? Any examples of how I can improve business growth? Well, I like this question a lot, because often when I meet people and I tell them I'm a sales consultant, they always look at me and say, like, you're the sales consultant. I thought you were a marketing consultant. So, yeah, gender inclusion is a good sales strategy. And for me personally, I feel that men and women bring different skills to the table. And I'm not being generalizing here. It's just that if you look at gender inclusion, there are companies which are doing this very well. Amway and stuff like that. Companies use a lot of, there's a company called Stone Soup. They use Sathis, which are women who actually are resellers of the product. We have Amway. We have a whole lot of people who use women to sell. Uh, so examples really would be companies in the social sector who use women to sell feminine hygiene products, to food products, things which are traditionally bought by women, where the woman is the decision maker. So yes, if you feel that, but I'm a salesperson, so I would like to say that I don't think gender is so important. I think what's important is if the person brings the skill set that you need. So if you are working in a category where you are selling products where the buyer is a decision maker, as a woman, and she is more comfortable with dealing with women, then surely you should use women. If the buyer is a man and who's more comfortable working with a woman, that's also fine. But what I'm trying to say is build, trying to understand what will help you achieve your sales goal. And if you feel that having women in your sales team will help you achieve sales goals, then you have to look at it in two ways. What does the buyer want and what does the founder want? Buyer may or may not want a woman, but if you feel that your company will do better if you have women salespeople, then definitely you should hire them. So to sum up, yeah, there are companies which do have a lot of women on their roles. A lot of established companies also, like Unilever, where I work. I was a sales manager, so it doesn't really matter. They hire us for our skill set. and whether they think they can get the job done. So if you believe a woman can get the job done, definitely take them on. Second, if you feel the buyer would be more comfortable if you're working in, like the previous person, low income household, or somebody who's selling food supplements to rural women, and if you feel having women would be a better sales strategy, then definitely I suggest you know look at it. And does it improve business growth? Yes. What would happen is your prospecting will become shorter, your qualification time will become shorter, and women will be able to close faster because if you feel the other person is more comfortable talking to a woman. So let's take the example of hygiene products, which are being sold by Stone Soup in low-income households. They sell menstrual cups. They are sold predominantly by women who are called sathis, Stone Soup sathis. They approach other women. They talk about why it's better to switch from conventional means of menstruation management. And instead of moving from that to, say, a regular sanitary towel, why they could use a reusable sanitary towel, or why they could use a cup. Now, talking about this itself is very difficult for many men. I'm not saying everybody, but and many women may not feel comfortable to talk about these subjects. So by having a bunch of women who actually sell to other women on a matter like this, yeah, that's fantastic. But honestly, I feel you can use women even for things which are not feminine products as well, provided they bring the right skill set to the table and they want to work in an organization like this. Do we have any more? Yes. Oh, yeah, sure. I don't know, maybe the low cost cooling solutions company, please tell us your name. Sounds very exciting. Someone wants to know. Do we have any more questions? I have 10 more minutes or so. Oh, okay, great. So I think from my side, what I'd like to say is in my presentation, I try to talk about the role of sales. So just to summarize, 2020 was a difficult year for all of us, and the economy shrank. We suffered a lot, and it was tough. 2021 is year of transition. We can actually start planning for a better tomorrow. And one of the things is social entrepreneurs will play a very important role here. Why? Because as the economy recovers, social entrepreneurs will fill the gaps which the markets or the government is not able to do. So it's absolutely imperative that social organizations, they start building bigger. One of the things which social organizations need to build bigger is a strong understanding of the principles of selling as well as a good sales module. So, oh yeah, one last question. I'll answer that. So, innovative sales. Okay, sure, I'll cover that. So now the important part that I'd like to mention is one, understand how you should communicate to your customer. If you're a technologist, if you're an activist, if you've not really sold stuff in the past, it always helps to spend some time making sure that your communication is relevant and it is differentiated. And you can spend some time and you can do it. There are lots of resources available online. You can contact me. I could share the material, and that's fine. Second one is, are you actually looking at it from the customer's lens? The reason why I'm spending so much time on this is often early stage startups, we love our product so much that we don't look at it from the customer's perspective. And that helps us, that really helps us in closing the sale. And last but not the least, how do you identify a good sales strategy? So there are, you can Google and you can say innovative sales strategies, and you can look at case studies. But what I would suggest is the first step would be uh, be very clear. Are you a B2B company? Are you a B2C company? Are you a B2B2C company? And look for sales strategies by companies that you admire in that space. Companies who've done what you want to do. It doesn't have to be necessarily in your category. It could be in another category, but you feel that, yes, I would like to replicate the impact they had, the outreach, the footprint they had, and just try and understand how they went about it, because the chances are somebody, and it doesn't have to be a social sector company, it could be a multinational, very good in sales. So you could look at some other company and say, I want to use the same sales strategy that they have, though I'm going to sell a totally different product because I think it works for me. So the point number one, look at brands, look at brands which are really into your space or which you admire, and see whether you can copy them. There's nothing wrong in copying an MNC company. In my opinion, I've found MNCs, and I've worked in lots of them, their products may not necessarily be the best, but they have the most amazing sales and marketing strategies driven by structure, driven by metrics, driven by review. So My suggestion would be look around, look at companies whom you admire, think whether you like their sales strategy would be on SlideShare or wherever you want, and read about it. If you have any questions, you can contact us. We'd be happy to share the stuff for free because really, the better you guys do, the better it is for us. So that's it. And my other question, IoT. Oh, how exciting! We are into IoT cattle health service. How do we create a sales channel at the village level? Oh, this is fabulous. I've just been talking to people in Gram Panchayat. And my suggestion would be, look, ultimately it is the Gram Panchayat. So if you're looking at village level, I'm sorry to say this, but you'll have to look at how can you reach the Gram Panchayat and tell them that we are offering cattle health service. So I will suggest that for this company, you don't look at it top down, look at it ground up. I want to go to 500 villages in the next 10 years. 5 years, 1 year, it's up to you. And to reach these 500 villages, there is a buyer and there is an influencer. Who is the buyer? The cattle farmer. Who is the influencer? The Gram Panchayat. So my suggestion to you would be look bottom up, look at the villages, look at the districts. Is it an aspirational district or is it a better off district? Either way, it doesn't matter. In a village, there will be a buyer and there will be an influencer. If you are lucky, there will be many buyers and there will be few influencers. Our job is to have a sales channel that will go and meet each village panchayat or each person in that village who we feel is an influencer, and that you can find out by just visiting the village because you'll know immediately about the salesperson. So one, follow a ground up approach. Second, most important thing while you're doing ground up approach, who is the person who's going to go to that village? Well, recruit the right person. Initially, I'm sorry, it will be you who will be going to the villages and will be, maybe you could convert like 100 villages in a year and a half. It's possible if you have if that's all you're doing, otherwise it's going to be difficult. But once you know that it's a ground up approach, we need to find somebody who can do it. So um, here I'm going back. You need to find someone who understands the language, who is from that district, and who knows his job is to go from village to village to explain IoT-based cattle health device. Here, what I would like to say is, since it's a ground-up approach with a salesperson, as a startup, you will have to invest in some fabulous selling material because your low-cost resource who's going to go from village to village, he may not be able to bring the passion and the technology that you guys can bring. So you will really need to go ahead and invest in some very nice brochures, some videos, and everything that will equip your low-cost salesperson to go from village to village, to talk to the influencers and buyers. Usually if you go to the panchayat and he'll organize a session for you, it doesn't cost too much. And then you present it, you can do it on video, you can do it using brochures, you can take it forward in any way. Some of the early pump set manufacturers in the distant past, they used to have a little van, and this van was like a modified auto which would go from village to village, and it would show this film. And those days showing film was a big deal, so it showed this film with a loudspeaker so everybody could hear it, and that's how they would communicate. So it would be the owner's voice or the owner's vision would be communicated graphically, and the salesperson would be there to handle objections. So the prospecting happens when you go from village to village. People come, get to know about your brand. If it's relevant, they'll hang on. If it's not relevant, they don't. And the answers are actually fielded. The objection handling is done by your person who is there, the salesperson whom you've hired, because he's familiar with the territory, he knows the language, and you've given him enough training and comfort to know that he has to go out and speak for you. I hope I was able to answer that question. We have, I think, 2 minutes left. So any more questions, or would you like to wrap up? I leave it to our MC.
Thank you so much, Rini, for sharing your expertise on this topic with us. It was really great to be a part of this session, and I'm so sure that the participants feel very much the same. For those of you who would like to connect with Rini, please head to the networking lounge where you can meet and converse with her. You can also access the resource files used for the tools shared by Rini during the session at the startup booth by Centric Brand Advisors. Coming up next, we have a session around how social entrepreneurs can make use of NDHM and build solutions for Bharat, and a masterclass on designing effective pilots. You can also meet Utsav and Naman from the Nudge Foundation in the networking lounge. Thanks to all of you who joined us for this session, and see you again.